Joining me now here on the Hockey Hub, you might know him as an NHL Hall of Famer, Stanley Cup champion, TNT analyst. One of my favorites that I don't hear enough is author, but more importantly, Eddie Olczyk. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Hockey Hub here at NESN. I was just asking you how you're doing. I know it's been a whirlwind of a week physically and emotionally, but again, how's everything going?
Yeah, Kasey, nice to be with you, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's been a real emotional week. I think first and foremost, in my hockey and broadcasting career, it's taken me to the city of Pittsburgh, and I was a player there for 2 years. And then when I retired in 2000, Kasey, I got brought back to Pittsburgh with Fox Sports Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I got the great opportunity to have a first TV partner in the legendary voice of the Pittsburgh Penguins, the great late Mike Lange, who passed away this week. And it was obviously a very emotional time to have known Mikey and to lose him. I mean, he had been in a battle for a long time, and to get that call last Wednesday, right in between, the preliminary round of Four Nations, which I was in Boston for TNT on Monday, and then obviously the championship game on that Thursday night to get the call. So I was scheduled to be in Pittsburgh on the weekend for a TNT game, the Rangers and Penguins on Sunday. So I was lucky enough to get in there early enough and get in there on Saturday, and was honored to be a part of the on-ice festivities and honoring the late, great Mike Lange. And I could just say to you, Kasey, is that he was a mentor, somebody that took me under his wing, somebody that lasted 46 years in the city of Pittsburgh calling Penguin games. He also did baseball way back when, a Sacramento kid who really didn't know anything about hockey until a little bit later in life, so to speak, and spent some time in Phoenix with the Phoenix Roadrunners, and then worked his way to Pittsburgh. So it's been an emotional week, like you said, a very tough week, but just so happy that I was able to have Mike Lange in my life for as long as I did, and to have been his partner for 3 years, my first TV partner, I certainly will take with me the rest of my life. So my condolences to Mikey's family, to the Penguins, to the city of Pittsburgh. And I said, Kasey, the other day, is that Mike Lange loved Pittsburgh, but he loved the Penguins more. And when you're the voice and be the soundtrack of the Pittsburgh Penguins for 46 years, and 5 Stanley Cups, you've had a hell of a run, and there's no doubt why he is a Hockey Hall of Famer. So, yeah, it's been an emotional week, but going to try to think about the good times, and always made each other laugh. So that was something that I will take with me as well.
Yeah, from everything that I've heard, he's given everyone such amazing memories to hold on to and continue to honor, in his memory and whatnot. Robert Healy III said he was sports in Pittsburgh. And you mentioned his journey. I mean, to not come from a hockey background per se and then to become fully ingrained in it, it just shows you how much hockey is growing and, where these voices can come in and make such an imprint and an impression. I got to ask before we move on to anything else, did you have a favorite line? Because he had such great lines. I mean, slap me silly. I think it was slap me silly Sydney. It just stays in the brain. So was there one line that was just like, only him?
I would say probably Great Balls of Fire. I just kind of thought that was quick to the point, and then he would obviously elongate it a little bit, but then he would give the player's name maybe that had scored or what have you. But look, I spent all that time with him, and had known him obviously over the years, and like with great broadcasters, they're magnets, and they're fans, and the organization, with him having all of his sayings, I've been around him a lot, and I'm saying thousands of people would say, hey, why don't you try this, or hey, why don't you try that? And he was always very cordial. But I would say Great Balls of Fire, Mike Lange, the one and only. I would say that's the one that probably, besides seeing him and walking into the TV booth at the old Igloo in Pittsburgh, or PPG Paints Arena now, or any arena in the National Hockey League, KC, the one thing we always did was we made each other laugh, and anytime I could walk into a booth and it would say nothing, and I could just see Mikey just smiling, smiling like a butcher's dog as well. That was one of his coined phrases. But we we always made each other laugh, whether we really said anything or not, if that makes any sense. So, but I'll say great balls of fire for the legendary Mike Lange.
I love it. Yeah, it's always just a presence that can do things that are unspeakable. So I think his presence and his impact on the game speaks for itself. And like I mentioned, a journey like his helps grow the sport of hockey. We had a major tournament that just took place with 4 nations. Now, heading into this, it was to replace All-Star Week. So originally, I think everyone was kind of on a lighter note of what 4 nations would become. And then it turned into this beast. It turned into this competitive monster. And everyone was just so hype and excited to represent their country and wear it on their shirt. But what did you make of the 4 nations tournament going into it and what it became?
Yeah, full disclosure, we talked a little bit about TNT on TNT when it kind of the format first came out, and then knowing who the 4 nations were going to be, and all of a sudden the teams were set. And I look at having lucky enough to have represented our country at the 84 Winter Olympics, 87, 91 Canada Cups, and 3 World Championships for Team USA. Don't matter the season, doesn't matter the tournament. It's going to be all out, and you're in it to win. And there was no hesitation. I knew, because the hunger for best on best with these NHL players, because remember, this was a joint venture between the NHL and the NHL Players Association. The players have been lobbying for a tournament like this for a long time. I mean, we've been, 10 plus years since we've had the best on best at the disposal of all of these countries. And it just happened to be particularly just 4 countries this time. But I was not surprised with the intensity. I was not surprised with the attitude and the drawing in a line in the sand, especially between Team USA and Team Canada. So I think hockey won. Both host cities, obviously where you are, Kasey, and Boston, did an amazing job. We were there for TNT for the last 2 games of the prelim, which was unbelievable. And just to be a part of it and to see the excitement in the city and the garden and the countries representing the great game of hockey. But then also in Montreal, I mean, they did an amazing job, and it's just so fun. And so I think the game of hockey won, and I think sometimes I think it's gone under the radar a little bit, Kasey, is that this tournament was placed and given to be a little appetizer for what's going to happen a year from now. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the Olympics, where you're going to have the best hockey players in the world from every country qualifying will be over in Italy playing for a gold medal. And the league hit it out of the park. There is no doubt in my mind. And I think that the league has announced that they're going to do more of this. Now, the next time we have a similar version, Kasey, of 4 nations, I would imagine that it's going to be probably in that 6 to 8 nation face-off. And, to do it right, you're going to have to take probably 2+ weeks off in order to really have a legitimate type of tournament. And when you have a 4-team tournament, it can be condensed. There's only going to be the 3 games that each country is going to play, and then you get right into a championship. So if you add a couple, obviously do the math and the days, and you want to make sure you're giving the athletes all this rest. So for me, long-winded, it was more than a grand slam. I think the league hit it out of the park, and look, the players wanted it, and they showed up. And look, there were players that played in this tournament that probably were not 50%, but they found a way to gut it out. Now, I'm sure their teams back in the NHL, and I know obviously, the massive story is Charlie McAvoy, are probably, thinking twice about, a tournament like this, but it's a venture between the league and the players. And look at injuries. Guys can get hurt in practice. They can get hurt in games. They can get hurt at home. They can get hurt in the 4 nations. Is it perfect? No. But I think it's a win-win for the National Hockey League and the game of hockey, not only in North America, Kasey, but throughout the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to see kind of like new fans that gravitated towards this. It was fun and cool because on social media, you just saw people that were like, this is hockey. Why have I not been watching this? And
Right.
you can get
Right.
that joy and intensity, of course, come playoffs. Now, sticking with the injuries for a minute, because yeah, that has
Yeah.
been the most alarming portion of all of this. And I don't want it to take away from everything Four Nations brought to the table. But what would you say about the turnaround window? Because you had players that had 30, 36 hours
Yeah.
to tap back into the
Right.
mentality of focusing on their hockey club per se. Luckily, you had McDavid that was able to go straight to Philly, but the Edmonton Oilers
Right.
didn't have a strong performance this weekend. They let up 13 goals in totality. So what would you say
Yeah.
about the turnaround window from Four Nations to getting back in the swing of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. Let's just call it what it is. But again, the business of the National Hockey League, and there is that fine line, Kasey, right? I mean, you're weighing the tournament, but then also you're walking away from the National Hockey League, the business of this venture, and you go dormant for a couple of weeks. Is that good for the brand? Well, I think what's good for the brand, obviously, is the tournament. So there's the give and take on that, but then also players being off for such a long period of time that aren't participating in the Four Nations. But then to the athletes that are there, get a couple of practices in, go play a couple of games, play some emotional games, and then all of a sudden you're playing in a championship, and then you're right, you're dropping the puck 36 hours later. Look, ideally, would you like the scene to give these guys maybe till Sunday, give them a couple of extra days off, um, and just try to meet halfway, so to speak? Yes, absolutely. But as we know, and being in the media business as we are, TV drives a lot of what goes on in these sports, and whether it's time starts for games, or it is how the schedule is presented and plays out, whether it's regular season or throughout the playoffs. So it wasn't, and it isn't perfect. I don't think there is anything that's perfect, but I think when you do put it all in the blender and you pour it out, I think that it absolutely ends up being a win-win for everybody. Yeah, some teams in the National Hockey League got the short end of the stick. Having to play very early on Saturday afternoon, and there was a handful of guys that had to play in those games. But still, is that enough time to have one full day off and then have these guys play on Saturday? If somebody would ask me, I would say absolutely not. But they didn't ask me, Kasey, so I just showed up and did the game on Sunday, and we got the National Hockey League back.
Yeah, well, you know what it's like to grit through situations. At the end of the day, hockey's hockey. We saw players be pulled on to have almost play every other night back after the COVID season. Yeah. I think it was the 52 or 54 games. So they can manage, even with it not being ideal. Now, I need us to kind of put our Nostradamus hat on for a second, because going along the theme of injuries impacting some of these hockey clubs, it's a tight race in the East right now. Yeah. So now you've got this tango going on between the Maple Leafs and the Panthers. Panthers not having the best news when it comes to Matthew Tkachuk, but this morning it came out that he is expected to participate in the rest of the season at some point. We know McAvoy's out for the Bruins, and they're kind of on the cusp of potentially getting back in a wild card spot. And then you've got teams like the Capitals. They should be rested. They should be fine. They didn't really have players invested in this, and their stretches ahead in the points. How can this kind of mess with what takes place over the course of the next 5 games when it comes to such a close Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I think it is the unknown, right? Because you can have teams come out of this, and look, we've only had a small sample size. You mentioned Edmonton a little while ago. All of a sudden, the Edmonton Oilers were pretty darn good defensively prior to the Four Nations tournament, and here we are, Kasey, and like you said, I mean, you're giving up 15 in 2 games. So, I mean, some teams are going to come out of the break and they're not going to be phased. That would be the Washington Capitals, who, put up 15 goals themselves in 2 games and won both of those games against Pittsburgh and Edmonton, respectively. So it's how is it going to play out in 6 weeks or 7 weeks from now? I think a lot will have to do with the trade deadline coming up right around the corner and how teams perform here in the near term. You're right. There is a heavy. It is condensed down at the bottom of the wild card in the Eastern Conference, and who's going to be that team that can get hot, that can turn the corner very quickly. I mean, look at the New York Rangers. Let's talk about them for a second. I mean, they get absolutely annihilated in Buffalo. They give up 8 goals on Saturday. and then they come back in a game where they totally dominated for the first 38 and a half minutes of the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins yesterday afternoon, and all of a sudden JT Miller takes a shot, and it's a 1-1 game. Igor Shesterkin for the Rangers is playing unbelievable. Miller goes top shelf, and the Rangers have a lead after being outplayed and only having maybe 5 shots for the first 36 minutes of the game. Like, you're going to need games like that if you are the bubble teams that are on the outside looking in, or maybe in the wild card. Detroit, Columbus, they got a big game this weekend at the Stadium Series this coming weekend at the Shoe outside. The rivalry of Michigan and obviously Ohio State kind of playing to the idea of the Stadium Series there. I will actually be there, Kasey. I'll be working for Sport USA Radio. I'll be doing that game on radio nationally. I get to work with my former partner here in Chicago, the great Pat Foley. We get to do that game on radio. So I'm looking forward to getting there. But, which one of these teams, Columbus, Detroit, the Rangers, the Penguins, the Bruins, which one of these teams is going to be able to go on a run? And will that run be allowed to be sustained once you get near the trade deadline? And then, which way are you trending at that particular time? You mentioned, injuries, right? I mean, you've got, you got both Lindholms there with some issues. The last time I checked with the Boston Bruins, obviously you mentioned Charlie McAvoy. You mentioned Matthew Tkachuk, but I know they're more towards the top of the totem pole. How will this affect the general manager's points of view of where they are come trade deadline, or do they sit there and go, you know what, let's cut bait now. Let's try to get some assets here and not really worry whether we finish 9th in the conference or we finish 13th or 14th. Maybe we can beat teams to the punch. So I think it's absolutely wide open, and I will not be shocked to see it come to the last game of the regular season where a team could maybe be the first wild card, or a team could be out of the playoffs, because I think it's not going to. I don't think there's going to get any separation at the bottom. I think you're going to see teams going up and down, and it's going to be within 1 or 2 points. And maybe we get the situation, Kasey, where you get to the last game of the regular season for somebody, and they got to win in regulation, and then maybe you got to pull the goaltender late in the game in order to get a goal. So there's so many things on the table, and again, people should not be surprised, because with the 3-point game in the National Hockey League, it's really, really hard to get separation. And the last thing to put a bow on this is that when you dig yourself a hole at some point in the regular season, it is so tough to dig yourself out of it. And you don't want to be where a lot of these teams are, but they still got an opportunity to make the playoffs, because once you get in, you get a hot goaltender. You just never know what the hell can happen come the NHL playoffs.
Yeah, you really start to feel that pressure right about now. What I appreciate, what I'm excited to get your insight on, is you got to wear the hat of an outstanding NHL player. You got to wear the hat of a coach, and now you are doing analytics. Kind of walk me through what the pressure might be like, because taking it to the Bruins locker room, Don Sweeney comes out this weekend and says no big moves really are going to be made by the trade deadline. So they're probably thinking more big picture at this point. But you do have a talented roster here in Boston.
Yeah.
What's that mindset like to keep fighting the fight? You're within a point of your biggest competition, but every point matters from here on out. They have a big 2 that they have to collect tonight versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. So what's that process like to not let that pressure into the locker room?
Well, you can only control what you can. You can't. It's hard not to think about the guys that you don't have and know that you're probably, you can't put a number on it, but you're going to be 25-30% better if you got Charlie McAvoy in the lineup. But it's the next man up mentality, and you have to play. And I do like that. I do feel like the Bruins have that type of roster to make the playoffs. And when they are completely healthy, they do become a dangerous team. They do have very good goaltending in Jeremy Swayman. Sure, if some guys had some down years, absolutely. Well, the reason that the team is battling for a playoff spot is because you've had some guys, you've made some changes, obviously, a lot of changes over the course of the summer. You've had some guys that gotten off to some slow starts, and that doesn't bode well when you dig yourself a hole. And you have some of your most important guys out on the back end, especially Hampus, Lindholm, and Charlie McAvoy on the back end, because you would argue your two top defensemen, are out of the lineup. But nobody's going to feel sorry for you. I know Joey Sacco very well. I'm a big fan of Joey, and you just gotta, the lineup that you have, you gotta find the right combinations. You got to be able to find ways to win games a little bit differently when you don't have your best players in the lineup. And sometimes it isn't pretty, but at the end of the day, to your point, I mean, every point matters. Doesn't matter who you're playing, and give yourself a chance. Like that, I think that's all you want. You want to give yourself a chance to be able to be in it right at the end. And then also, too, I think around the trade deadline, and respectfully, I know what Donnie Sweeney said, but if somebody comes knocking on your door and really, knocks your door down, he's too good of a hockey guy, or anybody in the National Hockey League, I'd like to think, is going to, you're going to maybe have to think twice about something, or how is that going to affect us not only today, but also how it's going to affect us tomorrow and into the future years. So I think the Bruins, again, I mean, if and we know what ifs are, and not knowing the situations, especially of what's going on with Charlie more than anybody else, is that, they can get some bodies in there that they're going to give themselves a chance. But the consistency part too has probably been the most concerning, is, how come they can't be as consistent as we've seen them in the past? Well, part of that certainly is, the injury aspect, and we'll see if they can, find a way to keep scratching and clawing and find themselves, within striking distance at the most important time of year, and that's right around the corner.
Absolutely. I try to be an optimist, and I've tried to help Bruins fans realize that at one point in January, they were without McAvoy. The team did pretty all right, so let's see if they can string together some consistency. And plus, when your back end is changing a lot, I know that can put different pressure on your goaltender. Braden Coburn once upon a time told me that it changes the communication style between the back end and the goaltender when you've got young guys coming in. You got to simplify everything. You got to minimize everything. It's a lot of adjusting. But we do have a team in the East. It doesn't have to make too much movement. And we've got a watch for Ovechkin to top the great. What do you think is going to take place there? I mean, who comes back from a break and puts up a hat trick?
Yeah. Well, he had an appetizer on Saturday in Pittsburgh. I watched him, and it was one of those battles on Saturday. Like, it just wasn't going for him. His team put up 8, and I don't even think he had a point in Pittsburgh on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. But you're looking at it. I mean, this is one record case that when I looked at it, I was like, well, wow. I mean, is anybody going to ever get to this? And I never thought it would. Like, I thought that Mario Lemieux had a chance on the path that he was on, obviously. And look at Mario had back issues. He was battling cancer at one point, but he was on a trajectory to be zeroing in on Gretz's record. And obviously he fell short, but what Alexander Ovechkin has been able to do, and I made this point, I'm going to say probably 8 years ago, that I felt that Alexander Ovechkin really evolved as a player when he became much more selective in his physical confrontation. So if we take a step back, like, Ovi's always been the type of player to either try to go around you, go through you, and run you through the end boards into the third or fourth row whenever the opportunity presented itself. He really never bypassed contact. And I think he realized as he was getting a little bit older that he would be able to save a little bit more energy and conserve some energy if he just was selective. And he didn't get into those heavy battles that he always seemed to be right in the middle of. And you loved him for it. But I think what it's done now with him bypassing contact and being much more selective, there is no doubt in my mind, having played in the league as long as I did for 16 years, is that takes its toll. And he has been so much more selective here, I believe, over the last 8 years or so, that it has allowed him to be a little bit more fresher playing, and also on the offensive game, and having a little bit more energy. So when you put it all into the blender again, you get a guy that is obviously dynamic when he shoots the puck. He's dynamic when he is selective on being physical. but he's hungry and his team is hungry. And I think that they set out a goal this year as a team is that they're going to have the best year of their life, and they were going to get Ovi as close to or at the record this year. And I think they've rallied around this cry of getting Alexander Ovechkin to become, the greatest goaltender or the greatest goal scorer in the history of the National Hockey League. So to be within an arm's reach now of the great one is just absolutely an unbelievable feat. And this is the story. There is no doubt. I know the Four Nations is still at the forefront for a lot of people, but no doubt in the National Hockey League is when he gets within 3, 4, and 5, this is, you're talking about greatness. And we know he's the great 8, but this is the ultimate, because Wayne Gretzky pretty much has every record, as you know, Kasey, is anyone that's ever played in the National Hockey League. And to see Alexander Ovechkin on the verge is something that I know that I really never thought would happen. And here we are. So you never say never. I learned that a long time ago, but maybe I just thought that seeing that number of Gretz at 892 all these years is just like, how's anybody going to get there? And here we are, where Ovi is. He's on the doorstep. I don't know if he's knocking on the door yet this year, but he's right there. That's for sure.
That was going to be my question. Do you think that he captures? Does the 8 catch up with the great this season? And do we get a poetic one-timer to seal the deal?
I will promise you this: it will not be an empty net goal.
Thank you. Okay, as long as not.
Just knowing Alexander Ovechkin, a bit. I think he has great admiration and history for the National Hockey League. Is that if he's going to tie it, I think it's going to be on a legit goal. Now, look, a goal is a goal in the NHL. Let's make that perfectly clear. They're all important. But I think for him to tie it, I think there's no doubt it will be with a goaltender in. I'll just say that it'll be. I don't know how he'll score, but it'll be a goaltender in. And I think whenever that is if he is able to break it, I will. I'm not one of those type of guys that guarantee stuff, but I would be highly disappointed if he broke the record and there wasn't a goaltender physically within about 3 or 4 feet in the net. Now, if a goaltender gets beat out of his hockey pants, Kasey, then that's a different story. But I think you know where I'm going here. I think that it won't be an empty net goal with both goaltenders sitting on the bench for the opponent.
Yeah. Well, I'd go with you on that one, because we know that you've got a gear for some gamble with the horse racing background and everything else like that. So honestly, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us here on the Hockey Hub on NESN. Again, I hope that you have a little bit calmer of a week. And again, my condolences with everything you've got going on emotionally and physically. But thank you so much, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Kasey. Appreciate it. Make sure you say hi to Judd and Billy and Brick for me, and we'll look forward to I think I get one more game in Boston, I believe, before the end of the season. So hopefully our paths will cross somewhere down the road. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hopefully we see you and you bring us some luck here in Boston for more hockey content. Yes,
in the playoffs. Yeah.
That's what we're manifesting. We are manifesting that right now.
Gotcha.
For more hockey content, make sure you're following NESN over at NESN, as well as the Hockey Hub on YouTube on NESN. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Amazon, and more importantly, we'll catch you guys back here next time on the Hockey Hub.